When I first moved into Cedar Grove Estates, I thought I had found a peaceful corner of the world to start fresh. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns neatly trimmed, and the people seemed polite enough at first glance. But just like every picture-perfect community, there was one person who made life a challenge, and her name was Karen. Karen was the self-appointed guardian of the HOA. She believed it was her sacred duty to monitor every move her neighbors made, from the color of their fences to the height of their hedges. But when she noticed my dog Max, that's when her obsession truly began. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a retired police K9, a German shepherd with a calm and intelligent presence. He had served the county for nearly 7 years before I adopted him after his retirement. Despite his imposing look, Max was one of the gentlest creatures I'd ever met. He loved kids, slept at my feet every night, and never barked unless he sensed real danger. Still, to Karen, he was nothing more than a dangerous animal that didn't belong in her safe neighborhood. She started small, leaving printed HOA guidelines taped to my mailbox with highlighted sections about pet control and aggressive breeds. I ignored them. I thought if I kept to myself, she'd lose interest. I was wrong. One morning, as I was washing my car in the driveway, Max sat calmly on the porch, watching me like he always did. That's when I noticed Karen standing across the street, holding her phone up, recording. Her eyes were narrow, and she had that look of triumph, as if she'd caught me doing something illegal. I tried to pay her no mind, but within hours, I received an email from the HOA board. Formal notice. Neighbor complaint regarding an uncontrolled animal. The accusation was absurd. Max hadn't moved an inch from the porch. But Karen's influence with the HOA was strong, and she wasn't going to stop there. The next few days were filled with petty provocations, fake complaints about barking, reports of intimidation, and even a claim that Max had scared her child, though she didn't have one. Then came the day everything escalated. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I was in the backyard trimming the hedge. Max was lying in the grass, relaxed and lazy under the sun. Suddenly he perked up, not in alarm but curiosity. A squirrel darted across the fence, and Max stood to follow it, staying well within our yard. He didn't bark, didn't chase, just trotted a few feet closer before sitting again. I didn't realize Karen had been watching from her upstairs window. To her, this was the perfect opportunity. About an hour later, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. My stomach dropped. 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. My heart pounded as I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward the gate. Karen came running out of her front door, waving her arms dramatically. She pointed toward my yard, shouting loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. She told the officers that Max had attacked her, that she had barely escaped, and that the HOA had been warning me for weeks. The officers listened quietly, but something about their expressions told me they weren't convinced. They stepped past her and approached the fence. Max, ever obedient, sat still. His ears perked but his tail gently wagging. One of the officers, a tall man with a square jaw and calm eyes, froze for a moment when he saw Max. His hand slowly lowered from his belt. Then recognition dawned on his face. He took a step closer, eyes widening slightly. He turned to his partner and said something quietly. The other officer looked at Max, then back at Karen and frowned. Karen's confident smirk began to falter. I stood still, trying to understand what was happening. The tall officer's gaze softened as he approached the fence. He crouched down slightly, calling softly to Max, who responded by tilting his head and then gently walking toward him, tail wagging. What happened next made the entire neighborhood hold its breath. The officer smiled, that unmistakable look of recognition. He reached through the fence and patted Max on the head, saying something softly under his breath. The way he did it wasn't just familiarity, it was connection. It was history. Karen's phone wavered in her hand as she continued filming, her face now flushed with confusion. The other officer crossed his arms, watching the scene unfold with a small grin. The first officer finally stood up and turned to Karen. His demeanor shifted from calm to firm. She started to speak again, but he cut her off with a raised hand. The crowd that had gathered on the street fell silent. He looked at me, then back at Max, and nodded, as if confirming something important. Then he turned back toward Karen, shaking his head slowly. Whatever words he spoke next made Karen's face drain of color. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. The officer handed her a card and said something else, pointing toward her house. She stood frozen, clutching her phone, before storming back across the street, muttering under her breath. The officers turned back to me, both looking more relaxed now. The tall one smiled briefly, then gave Max another pat before heading back to his car. As they left, I saw the faintest grin tug at his lips, like he was remembering an old friend. That evening, I sat on the porch with Max beside me, his head resting on my knee. I thought about what had happened. The recognition, the officer's expression, the way he'd called Max by name even though I hadn't introduced them. It was impossible not to wonder. Had Max just been recognized by one of his old K9 partners? Across the street, Karen's blinds were drawn, her once busy yard quiet for the first time in weeks. She hadn't come outside since the officers left. For once, the street felt peaceful. But something told me this wasn't over. Karen was humiliated, and people like her never stayed silent for long. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a much bigger confrontation, one that would expose more than just her lies. The truth about Max's past, and about Karen's manipulation of the HOA, was about to come to light.
The morning after the incident, the entire neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Whispers traveled faster than wildfire in Cedar Grove Estates, and by sunrise, everyone knew that Karen's dangerous dog complaint had backfired spectacularly. People who used to look at me with suspicion now nodded politely when I passed. A few even smiled at Max, who had become something of a local celebrity overnight. But I could sense the tension brewing. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat quietly. By noon, I received an email from the HOA board, another urgent compliance meeting. The subject line read, "Incident regarding dangerous pet, immediate review." It was clear Karen had already gone back to work behind the scenes, trying to twist the story in her favor. That evening, as I prepared my notes and gathered Max's registration papers, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see the same officer from yesterday standing there, his uniform crisp, his expression calm but serious. He introduced himself properly this time, Officer Daniels, and asked if he could come in for a moment. Max immediately recognized him and wagged his tail, sitting loyally at his feet. Daniel smiled warmly and scratched behind his ears. Then, with a sigh, he looked up and explained everything. Max, it turned out, wasn't just any retired K9. He was Rex, a decorated service dog who had served the county for 7 years. Daniels had been his handler for most of that time. Together, they had been involved in over 100 operations, including rescues, narcotics cases, and even disaster relief efforts. When Rex retired, Daniels wanted to adopt him, but the department had implemented a lottery adoption policy, one that allowed civilians to adopt retired dogs if multiple applications were received. I had unknowingly been the lucky applicant who got approved. Daniel said he had recognized Rex instantly, the way he sat, his calm gaze, and even the small scar on his left ear from an old search and rescue mission. He hadn't wanted to embarrass Karen in front of everyone yesterday, but he'd made a report confirming Rex's identity and impeccable behavior record. "Karen's in trouble," he said simply. "She filed a false report, claimed Rex attacked her. There are no marks, no witnesses, and now, thanks to his service record, the department knows she lied." I thanked him quietly, relief washing over me. For the first time since moving into Cedar Grove, I felt like justice might actually prevail. The next day's HOA meeting was one for the books. Karen arrived early, flanked by 2 board members she'd clearly manipulated into supporting her. She sat at the front, arms crossed, lips pursed in that familiar look of superiority. When I entered with Max, her eyes narrowed immediately. But before she could speak, a uniformed officer entered the room, Officer Daniels. The murmurs in the crowd grew loud. He carried a small folder under his arm and nodded to the HOA chair before taking a seat beside me. Karen looked stunned. The meeting began with the usual formalities, but it didn't take long before Karen launched into her tirade. She accused me of negligence, claimed Max had lunged at her, and insisted he was a danger to community safety. She even waved her phone around, showing grainy footage from across the street that proved absolutely nothing. When she finished, Daniel stood up and opened his folder. He spoke calmly, with the weight of authority in every word. He explained Rex's, or rather Max's, history, detailing his service record, commendations, and behavior certifications. The room fell silent. Then he revealed something that made Karen's face go pale. Rex had been awarded the County Valor Medal for saving a child during a flood 2 years prior. His picture, with Daniel's beside him, had been featured in the local newspaper. He laid the article on the table for everyone to see. Karen's jaw tightened, but she still tried to speak. Daniels didn't let her. He went on to explain that filing a false police report was a serious matter, and that her claim had been officially flagged by the department for review. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chairman cleared his throat and said the words everyone was waiting for: "This association does not support false accusations or harassment of its residents." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face flushed red. Her carefully crafted mask of control cracked. She sputtered, trying to argue, but no one was listening anymore. Even her so-called supporters avoided eye contact. She stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, her heels clacking furiously against the tile. Daniels placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder before leaving. "He's a good boy," he said, looking down at Max, "always was." Then he smiled and walked out. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Karen avoided me completely. No more emails, no more recordings, no more threats. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and the HOA quietly removed her from the compliance committee. Neighbors who had once been distant began to stop by, bringing treats for Max and asking about his service days. Children from the nearby park loved hearing stories about his hero work. It was as if the truth had finally broken through the rigid politeness of Cedar Grove, replacing suspicion with genuine respect. But the biggest change came a month later, when I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single photograph, a faded image of Officer Daniels and Max during their K-9 years, both standing proudly beside a patrol car. On the back, Daniels had written, "Thanks for giving my partner the peaceful life he deserves." I framed it and hung it in my living room. Now, every morning when I look at that photo, I think about how close I came to losing Max, not because of anything he did, but because of one person's obsession with control. Yet in the end, it wasn't anger or revenge that won, it was truth, loyalty, and a little bit of poetic justice. Karen's house eventually went up for sale. She left without saying goodbye to anyone. The day the moving truck pulled away, Max sat on the porch, watching quietly as if he understood the final chapter had closed. And just like that, Cedar Grove was peaceful again, the way I had always hoped it would be. Max lay beside me, content, his head resting against my knee. I gave him a pat and smiled.